Hello everyone and welcome to this session of CSS. My name is Shaib Ismail, and in this session we will be looking at how to position objects and elements on the web page, as well as how to control the width, height, and margin of content on the web page using the CSS box model. In our previous videos, we learned about the various CSS visual rules and how we can use them to make our web pages more visually appealing and emphasize on important areas. We saw properties such as font family, font size, text alignment, foreground and background colors, as well as the background images. In this particular video, I'll be focusing more on CSS box model. This is one of the most important areas of CSS that you need to master. With this lesson, you understand and be able to control the dimensions of your boxes in your web pages. You'll also be able to set height and width of your content, be able to create borders around your boxes, and also you have the ability to set margins and patterns for your boxes. You'll be able to show and hide content using the content visibility, as well as how to control the overflow of content in our CSS. So, without much further ado, let's jump into today's lesson.
Alright, now that we are in our CSS, the first thing I would like to do is to go to my HTML and show you what I have in my HTML. In my HTML, I have a header, and the header contains an image and then a navigation. The navigation contains the links. Then I have a section. The section contains H1 and a paragraph. So there's also another section here containing an H3, two paragraphs, and a div. In the div, I have a paragraph. The same thing for the third section. So this is all that I have in my HTML file. Going back to my CSS, what I want us to start with is to look at the box sizing. This is a property that we use to control the aspect of the box, which is determined by the height and layout. Now, what this means is that we're going to set a property that will determine whether the values that we are going to set for the height and width in the near future, whether these values should affect the padding, the border, and then the content, or whether the padding and the border should be excluded. So this is how we're going to do that. First of all, let me take my HTML because I'm going to target everything in my page, everything in my page here. So I'm giving this property here, box sizing. Now, as I said earlier, the box sizing is going to determine how the box or the height and the width is going to be applied to the page. So the default value we have for this is content box. And this value means that whatever style or whatever value you are going to give to width and height in the near future should affect only the content. The padding and the border should be excluded. This is what it means. So when we set content box, it means width and height should affect the content alone and not the padding and the border. Another value that we can set for box sizing is border box. Border box. And this value means that the width and the height that will be certain in the near future, if we set any width and height, that width and height should affect the padding and the border. So we have to determine this. The box sizing property, this allows us to control the aspect of the box that we need to control using our width and height. So I'm going to set my box sizing to be content box. That way, everything I'm setting or the dimensions I'll be setting for the height and width will affect the padding and will not affect the padding and the border. The next thing I want to look at is the height. And the width. So the height and the width determines the dimension for a box. So they specify the height and the width of the content area, including the padding and the border. So what we're going to do here is to set the height for our header. So let's see what we can set here. Now note that the default, by default, the box is actually sized just big enough to hold its content. So whatever we have here in paragraph, the box, the invisible box around this particular paragraph is sized just enough for it to hold the content of the paragraph. That is why you don't see anything cut off from the paragraph. So we can determine the size or the height and the width of specific element in HTML. To do that, first of all, let me give this a background color so that our focus will be on a particular area. So I'm giving the header a background color of tomato. That means this whole area. All right, don't mind this white background here. This is from the image. That's why it is white. And then I'm now setting my height. So I'm setting this to have a height of 500 pixels. And just when I save that, you see that my header has now taken about 500 pixels of my page. All right, so all right, so I can go ahead and then add the width as well. It will also behave the same way, just that this will be in a vertical, in a horizontal dimension. So the width takes the horizontal dimension, the height takes the vertical dimension. So the width is only 400 pixels. That is what is ending here. So if I change this to 600 pixels, it will extend. All right, so and if you extend the page, you could see that the width is taking only 600 pixels here. It's not covered. If you want it to cover the whole page as it's already done, we can either eliminate this value, this property and value, or just give this 100%, and then it will cover the whole page. It take the width of the whole page irrespective of the sizing of the page. We say that that's taking 100% of the page, the width of the page. So this is how we include width and height, or we set a specific width and height for our pages. The next thing I want to look at is the minimum height and width and maximum height and width. Now the minimum width is used to set a minimum width of element box or the minimum height of an element box. Alright, so likewise the maximum height also, the maximum height and width is also used to set their maximum. So we can set a maximum height that when the page reaches, the content should stay as such. All right, the content shouldn't expand. It should stay there no matter how large the page reaches. The content should stay in a particular framework, or it should stay in a particular size. Likewise, the minimum width as well, you can set that no matter how small the page is resized, it should stay in that particular dimension. So first of all, I'm going to take my paragraph, and for this paragraph, let me give this a background color of chocolate. So our focus will be on the background color, on the text itself. So this is what we are resizing. So I'm giving this a minimum width of 70%. So we can set this. Now this means that the paragraph will be at least 70% wide despite its default width value. So the default width value is 100% automatically, but it's going to be, the minimum is going to be 70%. All right, so the same thing applies to the height also. I can set a minimum height of this time, let me use pixels, 150 pixels. And you see that the height is going to be extended, but it's going to stay at 150 pixels irrespective of the size of the page. All right, so initially the height took just the content or the area that it needs based on the content available to it. But this time around, it has a minimum height of 150 pixels. It doesn't matter the content, all right? So if we have more content in this particular box, if we have more text here, it will overflow. It will overflow. It doesn't matter. It will overflow in the sense that the container there is not able to take it. All right. So when we have a minimum height here, if I make this 50 pixels, you see that it readjusts. If I make this 10 pixels also, it also readjusts. So that is how we use the minimum height and the minimum width. Now let's look at the maximum height and the maximum width. For the maximum width, we can set that also. Let's give this 65 pixels. And this will mean that our maximum width, irrespective of the size of the page, the maximum width is going to take at most 65% of its space. So this is our page. So it is taking 65% of the whole 100%. The maximum height also behaves the same way. We can give this 20 pixels, and that is going to readjust here. So we can see that it has taken only 20 pixels. So it's no more adapting to fit or to contain the text or the content, but it's readjusting itself for it to fit only what it has been given. So we set it as maximum. The maximum height should be 20 pixels. So this is how the maximum height and the minimum height also behave when they are set. All right, next is for us to look at borders. So for the border, this is a property that will add an outline to the element. So with the border, we can have values that will determine how thick or how thin a border should be. You can also have a value that will determine the color of the border. All right, so first of all, let me get my element h1. So h1, and what I'm targeting is this particular h1 here, this. So I'm going to give this a border. So first of all, the border that we're going to give this, the first property we need to understand, we need to give this border a style. Without the style, the color cannot be shown, and then we can also manipulate the width of it. So first of all, let's set the border style, and the style, let's set solid, and then this is displayed here. This means that this border style should be solid. Now, there are other values that we can set the border to be, and those values we can have dashed, all right, dashed. We can have dotted, all right. So, or we can have inset. So these are some of the values that we can set our border style to be. Right. Now, another thing is that we can set specific sizes, or we can set specific styles to each of the specific areas. So I have here solid. All right, let me comment out this. I want to set only border. I want to set a border for only the top. All right, so I can have something like border top style. So border top style or border dash top dash style. That means that I'm giving a style to only the top of the border. So this will have solid. And you can see that we have only solid on top of the text. That's the H1 text. If I want a border at the bottom, I can have that also, border bottom style to be dashed, and that will also be visible here. So you can see that using these values or using these properties, that's border top style and border bottom style, I'm able to target only specific areas of the box or of the content. So I don't have to give a border the same border style to all the areas. I can use this to specify specific border styles to each of the areas. So as you can guess, we can continue to give this border left star, and that can be double. All right, so that will be this side, and then border right style, and that can be inset. All right, so this way we can target each of the areas. Now with this, it's a lot of work for you to do, but there are other ways that we can use this, or we can use a shortcut to write these particular borders. So instead of writing border top, border bottom, border left, and border right, we can use a shortcut like this, just using a shortcut like this. So border style, we can have solid, all right, that is for the top. And the next one, dashed, that is for the that is for the right. And then the next one, let's say dotted, that is for the bottom, and we can have double for the left. All right, so when we save this, let's comment out this and see the effect. Now when we comment this, you see that we have solid, that is for the top, dashed, that is for the right, dotted bottom, and then double, that is for the left. So this works in a clockwise direction, that is top, right, bottom, and left. So this is the shortcut or shorthand for writing your border. Instead of writing border top style, border bottom style, just use this one line and you're able to achieve the same thing that you have here. Now, another thing we want to look at under the border is the border width. All right. So we have the border set. So let me set my border here to be solid. All right, we have the border set, but what we want to do now is to be able to set the width, because these might look too thin or too thick for us. So we can set that here by setting border width to be thin. All right, and this becomes very thin. Or we can set this to be thick, and this will be more thicker than its default value. Or we can set just a value here, 800. This will still be a bit thicker than the default value. So this is how we set the border width. Now, as we saw earlier with the border style, we can equally give specific border width to each of the areas. So with that, we can have something like border uh, top width. And we can have here, let's say thick. Let me comment out this first. All right. And you can see that the top is more thicker than the bottom and the other areas. Then we can have that also border bottom width. Border bottom width, we can have that to be 1 pixel. All right. As I said, we can use values, figures to also add that. The values can be figures or words. So we can have here border right width, and we can have that to be thin, and border left width, and we can have that to be, I think, thick as well. And you can see that these sides are thick, this side have 1 pixel, this side is thin. All right, so these are the values that we can give to our borders. That is, we can have the border width, the top, bottom, right, and left. So this will affect each of the areas that they said. So as we saw earlier, we can have a shorthand for the border width as well. So with that, I'll comment out this first. So I have my border there. Now this will be just border width. All right, border width, and that's going to be, first of all, top 10, and I want the right to be 10 pixels, the bottom to be 2 em, and then the left to be thick. And this is what we have. Remember, 2 em is 32 pixels. All right, that's 16 times 2, 32 pixels. That is why this side is so big. So I think I can make this 1 pixel, 1 em, that will be 16 pixels. So this is how we use the shorthand for the border width as well. So as we said, this is for the top, right, bottom, and then left. This also goes in a clockwise direction. So just like the style, border width also goes in a clockwise direction if you're using the shorthand. Now, the final thing I want us to look at under the borders is the border color. How can we change the color of the border? So the value we use here is border color, and let's set this as coral, let's see. And the whole color of the border changes. So these also, we can set specific values for each of the areas by using border top color. And then we can have a different color for that. Let's say cornflower blue. Cornflower blue. And then the top have a different color. Same thing, border bottom color, and we can have this to have width, and the bottom will have a different color. So I guess you can guess the following. That's border right width, sorry, border right color, and then border left color as well. You can guess those ones and add them as well. So this is the way we can influence the color of the borders as well. Now this also, we have a shorthand that we can use for that. So I will leave you to add your own values, but the shorthand that we have for that is border color, and then you can have colors here, 4 colors here defining each of the areas. So you can put that yourself since you've seen the pattern from border width and border style. The final thing I want us to look at under borders before we move on is how we can use one line, or how we can write all these 3 properties and values in one line. So we can just have a shorthand for that. So writing border, we can decide to use only one value for each of those properties. All right, so border, and then the first value I can decide to give here is thin. All right, remember we are still dealing with the H1. So I want the style of the border to be thin. I want it to have a color of coral, and I want it to be solid. All right, and that is what I have here. So I've defined the color, I mean the style, I've defined the color, and I've defined the width of it as well. This is in no particular order. You can decide to have border and have the color first, have the style second, have the width last. it will still reflect. Okay, this is in no particular order. So this is one of the best ways for you to define your border. If you want to use this, this is one of the best ways. Now, the final thing under borders is for us to look at border radius. Now, the border radius will help us control the edges of the border style. So when we have our border, how do you control it? By default, the border comes in a rectangular form. So we can control this to be in a form of oval or to be in a form of an ellipse or anyhow we want to control the edges of the border. So for this, I'm going to hold my div. All right, I have a div set and the div is holding this days49 here. That is what the div is holding. So I'm going to hold that and I want to form a circle here so that these particular items will be in a circle. So I have my div held here. First of all, let me give it a background so that I can know what I'm dealing with. And this time around, let me use an RGB color, 0, 58, and 0. This will give me a dark gray color. All right, so this is obvious. This takes the whole of the div. And the next thing I want us to do is, first of all, let's define the border as well. Border, as we just saw earlier, is thin, that is the style, solid, that is the width of the border, and then coral, that is the color of the border. You can see that that is also defined here. All right. The next thing I want to look at here is, since I want this to be in a form of a circle, perfect circle, I want to reduce the width here by giving it 100 pixel. And I think that will do, giving it 100 pixel. All right, so I've given it 100 pixels. The next thing I want to do now is to have my border radius, and let me give it 50% and see what happens. And that will make this a circle. All right, so that is how we used to control it. If you make this 10%, you can see how rounded the edges are. So using the border radius, we'll be able to control the edges of our element, of our border. All right, so I will leave this at 50% and do a quick styles on this. I think here I will just forward the video a bit so I can have. All right, so I just added some little styles to my div here to make it look nicer. So using the border radius, that is what gave me the opportunity to form this circular object here. So this is how we can use the border radius. All that I did here is adding a text align to my paragraph, which is in the div because I have paragraph here as well. So I want this to affect only the paragraph which is in the div. All right, so text align centered, color is white. Then also I have a span. The span surrounds the 49 here. So the span, that is what I displayed as block because it was in the same line. That is, I use this to convert it from inline to block level element. And I increase the font size of the span, that is this 49. Then set the font width as bold and then the color to be yellow. Most of these things we saw them in our previous video when we talk about the visual rules in CSS. So the next thing we want to look at now is padding. And how do we add padding? Remember, when we look at the picture frame, the padding is the space between the painting and the picture frame. So in our case, the padding will add space between the content, all right, otherwise known as the painting, and then the picture frame. And the picture frame here is the border. So first of all, to do that, let me hold my H3. And in my H3, I'm adding a border here, 2 pixels, dotted, rosy brown here. And I'm targeting this particular H3 here. That is training in Ghana and training in Rwanda. That is what I'm targeting. From what I have here, you could see that the text doesn't have briefing space. All right, the border and the content, they are crumpled together. So using the padding, I'll be able to give it a briefing space. So the first thing I want to give is, let me give it a padding top. All right, and set this to be 20 pixels. And from this, we can see that there's now a bit of breathing space between the training, the test here, and then the padding here, and then the border here. All right. So as we said, this here, the space between this test and then the border is what has been increased, and that is what we refer to as the padding. Now, it means also here that there's a space between this test and then the border here, the bottom border. So we can increase that as well. So we can have padding bottom to be maybe 20 pixels for us to be consistent. 20 pixels as well. We can use that also, padding to the right, to add padding to the right to the 30 pixel. And we can use padding to the left to add 30 pixels to the left of the text. And this is how the text is going to look like. Now, this makes your content so nice. In fact, if you set this very well, it can increase the readability of your content on the website, because it gives a lot of spacing between your contents so that they will not be crumbled together. There's a shortcut that we can use to set this particular padding, sort of writing padding top, padding bottom, padding right, and padding left. We can use the shortcut here, and for that, I would add here padding and set this to be 20 pixels. Now, when you set one value for the padding, what this means is that all the edges, top, bottom, right, and left, will have 20 pixels. That is what it means. So they all have spacing of 20 pixels, and as you can see, the spacing to the top, to the bottom, and to the left are all the same. All right. Another shortcut we can use here, since we want to influence only the top and bottom and left and right. So assuming we have the same value, just like what we said earlier, top and bottom have 20, left and right have 30. Then we can use this padding the two, so setting two values. What this will mean is that 20 pixels, this will be for the top and bottom, and then the second value, 30 pixels, that will be for the left and right. So this here means that this 20 pixel applies to the top and bottom of our content, and then the 30 pixels applies to the left and right of our content. So that is how these shortcuts work. Now, the third shortcut we can look at is setting values for each of the areas. Assuming we have different values for each of them, using what we learned from the border, we can add let's say 20 pixels for the top, 15 pixels for the right, 30 pixels for bottom, and then another 10 pixels for left. So you can see that the top have 20 pixels, the right 15 pixels, the bottom 30 pixels, and then the left is 10 pixels. So this, we use this when we normally have different pattern that's on each of the edges. So this is when you use this particular shortcut. Another area I want to look at is the margin. Remember, when we look at the picture frame, you saw that the area outside, just outside the border, is the margin. All right. So in this case, the area just outside the frame, the picture frame, is the margin. So in this case, whatever we are setting is going to affect this area, it's going to affect the area beyond this particular border. That is where it's going to have the effect. So with this, I'll select my paragraph, all right? And my paragraph, I'm going to give it a border of 4 pixels dashed, and it should be dark red, all right? So that I can see what is selected. So this is my items here. I've selected all the paragraphs. Okay, so let's say paragraph here, and I've given it 4 pixels dashed and then dark red. I want it to be very visible so that we concentrate on what we are working on. So this here, using the margin, this also can have margin to the top, all right, and margin to the top, we can set this to be 10 pixels. And you see that the content will move down, all right, not the content moving down from the border, but the content and the border moving away, they move down. And then we can set this also bottom. Okay, margin to the bottom should be, let's say, 10 pixels as well. And when I save that, there's going to be more padding to the bottom of the content. All right, let's set margin left to be 20 pixels, and we can see that it has also moved here, giving it a 20 pixel space here. We can add margin to the right as well to be 20 pixels, and you see that it will move away from this edge here. So this is how the margin works. You can see that it's affecting everything or the space outside the content and the border. All right, it is just immediately after the border. That is where the margin is applied. So when you are setting your margin, pay attention to wherever that is applied to. So just as how we saw earlier on padding, how we can set a shorthand, or we have a shorthand that we can use for this. And for the margin also, we have a shorthand that we can use for that as well. The first of them, we can have margin 30 pixels, and that will affect the whole text, that is the whole area around the content, whether top, left, right, and bottom, it will be affected. And another shorthand we can use is margin 10 pixels here and 20 pixels here. So this means that the top and the bottom will have 10 pixels, the left and right will have 20 pixels. All right, so this is how we can set that. If we have different values for each of the areas, we can still have a shorthand for that. So let's say top 10 pixels, right 15 pixels, the bottom should be 30 pixels, and then the left can also be 15 pixels. So you can have something like this, denoting that the top and the bottom, denoting that the top and the bottom have 10 pixels and 30 pixels, the left and right have 15 pixels and 15 pixels. This is how we set the padding, the margin shortcut. Now, another aspect I want us to look at is how we can set margin auto. Now, the margin auto, or a margin having a value of auto, will help us horizontally center elements that are in block level. So if there's an element that is a block level element, automatically, if you set a margin auto on it, it's going to turn it into, it's going to position it in a horizontal center. So let's use this image, this picture that I have here. Let's use that for this demonstration. I have an image, and this image, I want it to be centered in the page. All right. This time around, when you zoom the page, see that this image is still to the left. So I want it to be centered, so that when you resize the page, it's going to be centered alongside the resizing. So with the image set here, what I have to do is that image or img element or tag in HTML is an inline level. I have to convert this to a block level. So for that, I'm going to set display as block here first. All right. The only reason why I'm setting this is because the img is an inline element. So in HTML, it is an inline element. So I'm converting it into a block level element first before I set my margin on it. Remember, I said the margin auto works on block level element. Then the next thing I want to do is to change the width of this particular image so that will be a bit smaller so I can see the effect. And then I'll add the margin now. So what I'm doing now is that I'm saying that the margin should have a top and bottom to be 0 and the left and right to be auto. So when I save this, this is going to be centered. When you resize the page, it's going to be centered as well, irrespective of how the page is resized. All right. So this is how we use the margin auto. This means that take the left and right and distribute it along distribute it evenly along the left and right. That is what is happening here. So this is how we use the margin auto in CSS. Now the next thing I want us to look at here is how to use the overflow. This is a property that we use to control the overflow of content in a container or in a box. So when we have a width set, a width and a height set, and then the content is overflowing, or when we are viewing the content on a different device that doesn't have a huge space or a huge screen size and the content is overflowing, how do you control that content? Do you want the content to just disappear, or do you want it to still be visible to the user or to the reader? So for that, I have a class here. I have an element with a class known as box overflow. All right, and let's see which particular element is that. Let's have this. So that is this paragraph. All right, these paragraphs have a class of box overflow. So what I want to do now is I want to set this particular class, this particular content. I want to set its height to be 120 pixels. All right, it has grown in height. All right. The next thing I want to set is the width. All right. I want to shrink its width to be smaller. So it's now smaller in width as well. So you can see that the second one, the content is overflowing. I think let me make this 100. Yes, you can see that the content is overflowing here. So with overflow set, this property set, I can set that my content should either be hidden when it's overflowing. Should it be hidden? If I set it to be hidden, the value to be hidden, it means on a device or at a point when this content, the width of it is 100 pixels, whatever the remaining text that is overflowing should be hidden. It shouldn't be made visible to the user. If I set this to be scroll, it means that whenever the size is up to 100 pixels, the weight, and the content is overflowing, then I should have a scroll bar so that I can scroll to look at the rest of the content. And this is what it means. All right. So you can scroll down in that same box alone to look at the rest of the content. The overflow is going to turn into a scroll. All right. So this is how we set this. You can set it to be scrolling, or you can set it to be hidden so that the user will not be able to see that. All right. Now, another thing I want us to look at is the visibility of content in our website. So for the visibility, this will render our objects to be invisible to the user without removing them from the page. All right, so we have a class here known as height. All right, so this image have a class known as height. So what I'm going to set with it is that I want its visibility to be hidden. All right, that means that this image will be hidden. But one thing you notice is that even if it is hidden, there's still the space there. The space is still available here. All right, this means that these elements will still be available in the page, but will not be visible on the page. All right, so when you go to your when you go to your HTML to inspect your HTML in the browser, this image will still be available. It doesn't mean that it has been taken out of the page. It's still in the HTML of the page, but it is not visible on the page. So we can use this. If we want to bring it back, we can use visible here, and this will be brought back. And remember, by default, every content is visible. So if you set it to be hidden, maybe at a point in time you can bring it back using the visible value. So this is how we use the visibility value or property in CSS. The last and final thing I want us to look at is how we can reset the values to default. Now, in all the pages, in all the web browsers, the web browser already have its own styling. All right. So when you start working with your CSS, you are about to style your page. You have to bear in mind that the browser already has some styling. Remember, I never set any margin or any padding to the right or left of these particular items, but it looks like they have some spacing between them. So this is some sort of styling that is already coming from the browser. So we call this the user agent's style sheet. Each browser have this incorporated in them. So when you design your website using just the HTML, already the browser, before displaying it, it will have its own a bit of margin and padding that will be added to the browser. Now, normally we reset these values because we want to have control of the whole page, because this have the tendency of causing problems. It's like someone started the building, you are coming to continue it. Usually, you will not have the same pace as if you started from the beginning. So we normally like to set these whole values back to 0, and then we take off from there by starting everything from scratch. So therefore, we use this here. So let me first of all select my body. Everything in the I'm referring to everything in the body. All right, so I'm going to set the margin to be 0, and that's when I save that. You could see that my content goes here. All right, it goes to the stream edge. So let me do that again. If I comment this out and save, you see that there's a bit of margin. So it means there's already margin set in this particular browser that is influencing my content. So I'm setting it to 0 and goes to the stream. I'm setting padding also to be 0, and then also it goes. So this is how we used to reset all the values in our website so that we can have a fresh start, so that we'll be able to have our own style sheet, knowing that this is what is affecting this, and there's no user agents style sheet affecting part of the pages without our knowledge. So this is all that I have for you in this particular video. In this video, we've seen how to add margin padding, seen how to add border and border radius, and also how we can hide the content in our website using the visibility. And we've also seen how we can control the overflow of content in our website. And finally, we looked at how we can reset the values to default by putting margin to be 0 and then padding to be 0. This is all that I have for you in this particular video. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of the video, and see you in our next video.